And so all of this has led me to really focusing in on how people retain their creativity or how they lose it. And if they do lose it, how do they get it back? And
Mm.
that in a nutshell is one of my big professional focuses right now.
Mhm.
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stephenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where our ongoing goal is to help inspire you to live your best audacious life ever. It's totally a pleasure to have you join us today, and I truly appreciate you taking time to check out the podcast. Now, creativity, when you think about it, it's like a spark that ignites personal and professional growth. Just as a flame can be dampened by the wind, creativity is often stifled by external factors, leading us to diminish it. However, with the right nurturing and environment, that spark can be rekindled, reigniting a passion for innovation and expression. Our guest today will delve into the importance of preserving creativity and ways to restore it if you've lost it. Today, we have the esteemed pleasure of being joined by Patrick Williams, an expert in creativity and education. He's got a background in art and teaching, and Patrick has dedicated his life to understanding how children and adults retain their creativity and how to restore it if it's lost. Patrick's expertise in creativity and education makes him an ideal guest for today's episode as we explore the significance of creativity in personal and professional growth. It really is an enlightening conversation I'm certain you'll enjoy. So without any further ado, let's get into our chat with Patrick. Hey, Patrick, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate making the time to do this. So thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here, Audley.
That's great. We were just saying before we went live here how wonderful it is be able to engage in conversations that can help individuals in profound ways. And I oftentimes say if at the end of this conversation, one person takes one thing that helps them get to a better place, and I'm good. Like I've done, I'm completing my mission. And so thank you for sort of being a part of that. We're going to center today's conversation around your specialty, which is creativity. And I like I'm a big fan of the topic of creativity because of the manner in which it forces you to think, so to speak, outside of the box, off the beaten trail. There are no rules. You make it up as you go. And then, if it worked, fantastic. And if you didn't, you say, oh, well, and you try again. So, I think that's really at least that's my approach to how I view creativity. Maybe others may have a different, there's a more official one that you can share with us, but that's what kind of how I see it. And maybe as a starting point, Patrick, I can get you to fill our audience in a little bit about you and the work you do and what's got you to this point.
Sure, I'd be glad to. I am a lifelong artist. I started drawing and painting when I was young, and it's always been a passion, and it's been my focus throughout life. But I also have taught in a lot of different spaces. I've been a karate teacher and an aikido teacher, but also taught artist in residency programs and visiting artist programs. So I've had a lot of experience in the classroom and studied, watched, and learned about how children and adults learn and are creative. And that has been a passion of mine for quite a few years.
Right.
My wife and I have a nonprofit that is an arts and education, and we do deep research and investigative reporting. And so all of this has led me to really focusing in on how people retain their creativity or how they lose it. And if they do lose it, how do they get it back? And that in a nutshell is one of my big professional focuses right now.
Mm-hmm. Where did it start for you, Patrick? Like, where did the interest come from? What made you decide,
Well,
this is where I'm going to hang up my hat?
that's a great question. I I was speaking with I was doing an interview last week, and she was in Australia, and she asked me that same question, and I gave another answer because I hadn't thought of the one that I'm going to tell you now.
So this
And
is an exclusive then. I'm getting an
this is
exclusive.
exclusive. Yeah, totally. Uh, this was probably, well, about 1987, I think.
Okay.
And I had recently moved to Seattle area, and I was starting to teach karate, but I was also doing my art. And you speak to any young artist, and they either have one or two or three part-time jobs.
Okay.
And at the time, one of my part-time jobs was at a preschool.
Okay.
And because I was low person on the totem pole, I was asked to open the school up in the morning, like at 6 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And there's
Mm-hmm.
always like 4 or 5 parents with their kids right there at
Ready to
6
drop
a.m.
off to go to work, right?
Totally, yeah. So I had this time in the morning with these 4 or 5 kids, and one of them was named Sam, and Sam was unbelievable at doing art. He
Okay.
was incredibly creative. And I watched him just discover and make things and invent things, and I was
Right.
fascinated by that.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, about maybe a year, he was 3, about a year and a half later, he stopped.
Okay.
And that puzzled me. And, I couldn't really have a decent conversation with him about it. So
Mm-hmm.
I just started thinking about that a lot. And that troubled me then, and it still is, occupies my thinking about how that happens. And yeah, I have a bunch of theories now that I've developed, but it is what really sparked me to really start diving in. I didn't dive in a scholarly way back then,
Yep. Yep.
but it was just like it was in my consciousness and my psyche. Why did he stop? He was just so incredible. So that's kind of the part of the
Oh,
origin story of really diving into what is creativity.
gotcha. And so I want to stay on that vein because I think in general, children, this creative, the energies are very easy to put on display and very easy to show, and you see it. It's vibrant, it's in your face, it's there, and it sort of feels that as we mature, we get older, life experiences, maybe some setbacks, there seems to be an impact on that our ability to be as creative or at least express ourselves. Is that a fair sort of assessment?
Yeah, that's a great assessment. Because I've focused so intently on it, I've come up with some language that describes what you just described.
Okay,
So
please,
so
yes.
yeah. So children, as you know, as you remember as a child, and you having children have witnessed this, as you just said, children are incredible at creativity and imagination and play. And then there are sometimes specific events or a series of events, and usually it's in school, but
Mhm.
sometimes it happens at home and then or out in the wide world. But there basically is less and less time for kids to be playing, to be able to use their imagination or use their creativity. And I call that creative colonization. So it's almost like, think of the school system as an invading force that comes into the children's mind or their
Okay,
psyche
okay.
and takes over. It interrupts their normal way to discover. It stops their way that they speak to themselves internally. It kind of takes away their uh, sort of inner rituals and how they learn and how they play.
Hmm.
And once that starts to happen, then there's just less and less time for kids to play
Right.
or kids to be using their imagination or kids to be involved in their creativity. And that eventually leads to what I call creative collapse. And
Gotcha.
that's when either there's a specific event, like a teacher says, you can't draw, and the kid never draws again.
Mm.
Or an adult says, you can't sing, and the kid never sings again. Or you shouldn't play the guitar because that sounds horrible. they may not be have a malicious intent, but it just comes out, and that can be devastating for a young child.
Right.
And that collapse just ends whatever creativity that criticism was attached to. And it
Right.
might end all creativity, or it might subdue it to such an extent that there's not a lot happening for
Right.
the
Right.
children.
Right.
And that continues. I call that the creative void. And it could happen for, the kid could spring back a week later and say, whatever, I'm going to draw, or I'm going to pick up my guitar. Whoever said that, they didn't know what they were talking about. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it may last a month. Sometimes it lasts often the rest of people's lives. They just never get
Yeah.
back to that love
Bounce
of
back.
whatever
Right.
they were involved with in a creative way. And that often happens around the arts. So, and when I speak about creativity to, especially to entrepreneurs or business folks, I'm not stressing the art aspect of creativity. I'm looking at it as the larger umbrella of creativity that is important for them to tap into, rather than people getting confused by me being an artist and me talking about creativity, that I'm wanting them to be an artist also. That's not
No.
what I'm talking about. If
No.
they do suddenly start writing poetry and they love it and they're dedicated,
Sure.
that's great. That's frosting on the cake, so to speak. But what I'm interested in is people restoring that inner joy of
Yes. Yes.
that we all had when we were children, of going outside and playing, or on a rainy day staying inside and playing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We would
Yeah.
invent stuff all the time, and
Yeah.
that's just
Yeah.
pure creativity.
Well, and again, I think the sense of play, and you touched on it a couple of times, how that's part of what we're talking about here. So it's not always producing a work of art or a poem or playing a musical instrument. That a general sense of play. And as we're talking about this, I'm reminded of my mother has a photograph of a picture of myself when I was like, I don't know, junior kindergarten or senior kindergarten, whatever. I was a young age, and it's a photo of me and another friend of mine, and there's a caption, and in the photo I'm wearing this hat and this shirt, and I've got a purse on my shoulder, and the little boy that says, it says, "Oh, Audley thinks he's a woman," or something like that. And I said, "No, I'm not. I'm a bunny rabbit." Right. And I think it's just the funniest thing because I don't look like a bunny rabbit. But again, it speaks that sense of play. And we talk about that innocence that children have, and they just
Absolutely.
go out and do their thing and not think about the rest of the world feels about them, couldn't care less, are not impacted. And so the part about that that I just so love is not caring what the rest of the world thinks,
Right.
believes, or the
Yes.
judgments. Like just being able to operate as freely as you want, and that part that's a part of that we lose. That I'm probably if there's a sort of if there's any sadness around, it's
Sure.
losing that part of it, because there's so much strength in
Right.
being able to stand your ground, be who you want to be, and it doesn't matter what anyone else has to say.
Exactly. I totally agree. And it's super important for people to realize that those experiences that we had as children that were disappointing or sad or even traumatic in some cases. I've spoken to people who had really traumatic interactions with adults around their creativity that really was disturbing. That when they start to approach their creativity again, sometimes there's a lot of feelings that come up about that moment, about that incident, or just simply the feeling of, let's say they loved to work with clay when they were 6 years old and something happened and they haven't touched it. Well, starting to work with clay again there's all kinds of feelings like, oh, it's been 20 years. Why did I wait 20 years? So there's those feelings also.
Sure.
So it's a tender process for people to re-engage, to restore their creative outlook and their creative sensibility, their inner creative, I call it.
I so love certainly the conversation about restoring creativity. To be honest, full disclosure is not anything I've ever thought about. I just, I think where I sort of got caught into is in this line of thinking, you're either creative or you're not. Like you're creative or you're not, and that's it, right? So, hey, he can draw. Well, I'm not creative. Well, drawing is just how it's expressed, but being creative can look like it could be a multitude of different things. But the language oftentimes is, well, if you can do this, you're creative. If you can't do it, you're not. But we're all creative in some fashion.
We're all creative, absolutely. And I've said this to others in your position, and they're like, "Yeah." And I say, "You have a podcast. You obviously are very creative." Because it takes a lot of creative thinking to schedule, to put together, to figure out how you're going to interact with people. What's your style? What's the rhythm? What's your goal? What are your goals? All these things they sit on this fertile soil of creativity that you have to tend to. It's not like, oh, last week you said, I'm going to do a podcast, and today you're doing a podcast. It took a lot of thinking and a lot of feeling and a lot of, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. And once you got started, there's more creativity about, oh, I didn't like that, but I do like this. So I'm going to remember to do this. So that's all a creative process, and it's a learning process. And that those two things, play, creativity, and imagination, are how learning happens. When we're excited with something, we learn it. When we're not so excited, we're not learning. We may be remembering, or we may be forcing ourselves to remember, but it's not raw learning. It's not true learning.
And so thank you for that, because one of the questions is, can creativity be taught? But I think, as we're discussing now, I think it's unearthed, right? Dig up,
in a way,
resurrect, bring back to life, so to speak, right?
For sure,
as opposed to teaching it.
For sure. When you said that, I thought, well, do we teach children how to breathe? No. Do we teach them how to drink their mother's milk? No. They know instantly how to do this. And I think creativity is the same way, because children just do it. It doesn't matter. You could take 10 children from 10 different parts of the world with no common language, and they're 5 years old, and you can plop them on a playground, and they're going to be playing with each other in a split second, in a Chicago second. So it's just a natural part of being human that we all share. And then it's so true. The same with adults. Once they realize that I'm sort of the person that gives them permission, in a way, right? That I give you permission to be creative again. And they're like, all right, I can do this. I love this. I feel this. So it's exciting to see that inner spark get to be a flame again, rather than just a little sputtering pilot light, so to speak.
So where does innovation fit in then, Patrick?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a slippery one too. Okay. There's in a way, it's fun, but it's challenging to work with business folks that are they're super interested in innovation. Everybody is. Everybody wants that sense of innovating the next big thing. Yet they firmly believe that if they just have the 10 steps for innovation and they follow them to the T,
I'm good.
They're going to get to the innovation. The next
That's not very innovative.
No. But what's so funny is that number 7, I'm just making this up. Number 7 is innovation. And so the team says, okay, next Thursday at 9:00, we're going to have our innovation meeting, the creativity meeting. We're going to nail it, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. we're going to have it all down, and then we can go on to steps 8, 9, and 10. Well, I'm the bearer of maybe not bad news, but deeper news. The deep news is that it takes more than just a meeting to be innovative. It takes more than just a meeting to be creative. And once people start to understand, it's like if someone was, I use the example, let's say the team gets together, none of us are runners, and we say, okay, next week on Thursday, we're going to run a marathon. That's going to be a complete failure. Out of the 10 people in the team, I bet nobody makes it past 3 miles, right? And then there's another 23 left or whatever. Yep. So innovation and creativity is just like that. We need to train ourselves for this. We need to set up an environment, or at least a little corner of your office or a little corner of your desk, that's where the creativity happens. That's where you can focus. That's where you have some things on your desk that remind you about creativity. Maybe a book of poetry, or maybe a photo of an artist that you love, or a reproduction of a painting. Something to remind you of okay, this is creativity time. Having a journal to explore this idea of not only of the, let's say the team is going to invent the next best widget.
Right.
Not thinking about the widget all the time. When you're thinking about the creativity and the innovation, you have to think about life. You have to think about everything. So it's a challenging process, but a rewarding process to get people to understand it takes time to get into the creativity, not just scheduling a meeting.
And so the interesting thing about it is that when you talk about thinking of everything, like that's when you truly are being innovative, because you are considering the other factors, other options, things that might come into play, things that might influence what you're doing. And when you're able to show all of these different things, that's when that's true innovation.
Absolutely. 100%. And it's challenging to get, especially some of the more old school business folks to accept that what I'm talking about is, I'm trying to think of the right word, it's intangible.
Got you.
They
want to see it, like, right.
They want to see it. They want to see it at least on paper. Step 7, dude. That's innovation right there. I see it on, that's the meeting we're having next week, right? And it's like, sorry, yeah, that's the idea, but you got some work to do. And once people embrace that, they're rewarded. They start to really feel, because when I talk to them, I remind them that they had this. They could have invented all kinds of greatest inventions when they were 5, right? And we did. We just don't remember it, but we probably had all kinds of ideas that were spectacular. So once they realize that.
So let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about staying creative outside of not growing up and getting older, right? How do you stay creative and stay playful?
Right. Well, it does take effort. Part of it is there's a love, and we all had that. I talk to people about, think about what you love to play during Saturdays or Sundays or summer vacations or holiday. Mm-hmm. Think about the thing you love to play that when you had to stop at night, you couldn't wait to play it in the morning. That's the energy that I help people restore, that feeling of like, oh, I can't wait to wake up in the morning and work on the widget, as adults working in the team, whatever it might be. So it is there. And once people realize it's there, and not only it hasn't gone away, where could it go? That would be like losing your ability to breathe. Like you forget to breathe. Like, oh, I can't, how do I breathe? That doesn't make any sense. Of course we we
Sure.
remember to breathe. And we
Yeah.
can even hold our breath. That's what's so amazing.
That's right.
It's
That's
not
right.
only I can't think of that word, but it's
Instinctive.
natural. We do it, yeah, we do it all the time, but then we can adjust it. So, and creativity is the same. It's in some ways, this is just kind of a riff on this topic, but it's almost as if so many people have started holding their creative breath when they're 5 or 6, right? And they've been holding it for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And by the time they are given permission to creatively breathe again, oh my God, what a relief. So
Funny.
I think people love it when they actually restore that connection.
We're talking a lot about creativity again from the play, and even from we referenced sort of the artistic standpoint. But there's a part about this that I think people should also not forget how important creativity can come when it can be when it comes to problem solving or
Yeah.
challenges in our lives.
Mm.
Even building our own resiliency. You've
Totally.
there are individuals who see problems and they automatically go into, okay, how can I creatively work through this? So creativity and problem solving, they do work hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have had sort of a personal peeve, I guess, about problem solving.
Okay.
And this came to me through my experience in college in the art department.
Okay.
I had one of my roommates also became, later he changed from, I think, anthropology to art, maybe our junior year. And he invited me to one of their painting critiques.
Okay.
He had a different professor than I had. My professor was way out there. He was just he was a rebel. He was a maverick. He was remarkable.
Yeah.
And I told him, and he said, "Oh, you have to go. You have to go." So my critiques with Richard were, I would bring some paintings up if they were small enough to fit into his studio, or if they were too big, he would come down to my studio.
Okay.
And we would talk about politics, we'd talk about symphonies, we'd talk about literature, we'd talk about everything. We would argue, and then we would start looking at the art, his art or my art. And then we'd talk some more, talk about art history or whatever.
Yep.
Laughing, shouting, throwing stuff. It was just a wild, powerful, huge learning process for me.
Sure.
I go to this other critique, and everybody's sitting in this little auditorium. People bring their painting up one at a time, and there's undergraduates and graduate students. I'm a undergrad at this time, and they put it up, and they all say, "I was working on this problem, and I was trying to solve this problem."
Yep.
And I kind of tilted my head, and I thought, I don't understand. What's the problem? And why are you trying to solve it? Why aren't you just painting?
Right.
And sure, I understood where they were coming from. I had ideas that I was attempting to work out on the canvas that weren't quite right, but I didn't feel like they were a problem. And to me, it felt like they were disengaging themselves personally from the piece of art, rather
Right.
than owning it with their heart and their soul and their mind and their thinking. So there was this disconnect, and I came back to Richard and I told him, and he just laughed. He just sat and laughed, and he said, "Yeah, I knew you'd love it." And he said it wasn't like our discussions. And I said, "No, it wasn't. I was expecting kind of something similar." So this is a long story around back to problem solving. So I do think it's useful at some level to think of problem solving and creativity being connected.
Yes.
But I also think that there's sometimes a positive place to let the problem go, because sometimes the problem can sort of ensnare you. You're like in a straitjacket, and you can't get out because all you're thinking about is the problem.
Right.
So that's where it's useful to take a walk, to go to listen to some jazz.
Sure.
So it just gets your mind out of the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally see that. I so for me, I guess when I also think about the problem solving, and there's some other things that are innate that come along with it, right? So like critical thinking, as an example.
Absolutely.
You're now looking about how to deal with that. Maybe working with others and collaborating on how to figure out, this problem. There's levels of creativity involved with that. Collaboration. Like I just sort of think that it creativity, problem solving also has a few other things that you can hitch that wagon to and benefits, right? Totally. So it's all encompassing.
Yeah, for sure. And it's useful because there's so many. There's 8 billion different ways that people think, right? Everybody thinks and approaches things differently, and in that process of problem solving, there can be some, in a way, back to the business folks looking at the steps. The problem solving can be beneficial steps in how we put up the foundation of what we're working on. That can be really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it might be. If we follow these, then we can really get a good idea of what we're looking at, what the issue is. And then from there, in some ways, once the problem, quote unquote, has some parameters, then we can step out and say, oh, okay, what kind of, do we want stone? Do we want wood? Do we want bricks? How do we want to construct the rest of this building of the issue that we're working on? So I do think, even though I tend to veer away from the world of problem solving, I totally understand how it's useful and how certain folks think in some ways very mathematical or logical frameworks.
Totally.
And to also understand that when you pursue math, the further into it you get, the more it looks like the arts.
Gotcha.
Right? So when Kurt Gödel, super famous, he was here in the States, he was Austrian, I think, just like Einstein, and he had offices. They lived next to each other. He was absolutely spectacularly brilliant, did some, the incomplete theorem he was famous for. But that was in a whole nother realm than addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. All those things were in the logic and the very fundamental mathematics, and he was way out in the ether, so to speak, of mathematics. So I think it's so super useful for people to have that they can rely on the fundamentals of steps to approach the creative process with problem solving something.
I guess kind of sort of staying on that problem solving vein, another thought that come to mind with inventors, right? Inventors who are creating something brand new. Oftentimes they're starting with a problem that they're looking to solve, or just something that they want to create. I have a what I speak to is something I call the bold framework.
I love that.
The bold, I don't know if you saw that.
I saw it on your site.
Beauty is better from yesterday. O is outlast adversity. L is live your truth. But the D, I think, is very applicable to our conversation because that's disrupting the norm, right?
Yep.
Breaking off those beaten paths, doing something different that hasn't already been done. I oftentimes use the example of the Wright brothers learning how to, building a plane. And I oftentimes envision the folks that are gathered around watching them and what they were saying to them.
Oh, yeah.
You're nuts.
No kidding. Yeah.
People don't fly.
Yeah.
You got to be out of your mind.
Yeah.
Like we don't belong in like all of these things, right? And so
Absolutely.
and be able, almost like that childlike brilliance we referenced earlier, to block the all out and say, no, I'm proceeding ahead
Yeah.
is just a wonderful thing. And it something that comes to mind when I think about just this whole creative process.
Totally. And they are a perfect example because everybody at Kitty Hawk, when they're out in, it was North Carolina, they did. That's what they told. They called them the crazy guys out on the beach. They were totally thought of as nuts, you know. And what's interesting is that there were other people who had, and this one guy in particular, I can't think of his name, he had government funding and military funding to invent a plane.
Right.
And he complete failure because he didn't have the passion
Yes.
that Orville and Wilbur had. They were completely inside this whole idea, like
Oh,
we can do this.
absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
invention it's just pure creativity.
Yeah. And you couldn't talk them out of it even if you tried.
No way, no way. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So Patrick, for individuals who are interested in connecting with you directly or working with you, where can we send them?
Patrick@patrickwilliams.com. I'd love to get emails from anybody who's interested to chat or learn more about what I do with teams or with individuals. I do mentoring programs.
Could you maybe
Also,
describe? Maybe you could describe that so people get a sense of what you offer, what you can do for them.
sure, exactly. I have individual mentoring programs that we devise a comfortable schedule for at least 3 months is a decent amount of time for people to really get to get going, to get their feet under them creatively. And that can be once or twice a week that I give assignments. We go over the assignment. We dig deeper into. I give them homework to do, the field trips, so to speak, to go out into the world and dive
Love it.
deeper into the creative process. And I do similar things with teams,
Yep.
and that can be, you can look at it as a workshop, and that workshop can be a day long, which clearly isn't really enough. It can be 3 days long, whatever it might be. It can be a weekend workshop, and I can craft that specifically to, if they're working on creating the next greatest widget, we can zero in on how they can do that. Even if it's a software idea, even if it's how can we run our business better? There are ways in which I can assist them learning about their own personal creativity that gets them going. I'm not going in there and teaching them. You mentioned this right off the bat. Maybe it was before we started recording, about how the question of, can you teach creativity? And I think people who try to do that always come up short because they're
Sure.
not relying on the person's inner creative self that already knows how to do it. So I just get people to reconnect, and then they can plug that into whatever their business is working on. It can be with teachers, how they can teach better. Everybody can benefit from restoring their creativity, getting back in touch with their creative psyche, creative self.
So as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking through, and so at the end of, say, working with you or teams working with you, is there a measurement? Like you can't measure creativity. Like how do you know if you're more creative?
Well, in a way, you can see it on their faces. At some point, that light bulb does come on, and it. Just like when you're standing in front of a bunch of students,
Yep.
and they're working on it, they're just starting like division.
Yep.
And you can see the light bulbs like, oh, I get it. So there are those moments, and once that starts, it accelerates. Everybody starts getting it more and more. And after there's a period of time when they can just send me an email and say, hey, can we have a quick Zoom call, because we're all scratching our heads again. We locked ourselves out of the car or whatever. So I'm totally available for that. But usually once once people get started and they really start to connect it's what we had when we were children. So it really lights up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, listen, Patrick, I really appreciate having you here and appreciate the conversation. And it's an important one because it's really making you think, right? And I think there's nothing wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Us evaluating ourselves. You reference, creativity as our superpower, right? So we all got it, right? So it's a matter of just using that to the best of our ability. And I think when we do so, we indirectly make this world a better place. Even directly, and I would say in some cases too.
Oh yeah, directly. Yeah. And it just makes I believe it just makes your life better. It's more fun.
Yes, that's it. And I'm not against fun at all, Patrick. That's it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you for the time. This has been awesome. Be well, my friend.
Audley, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Back we are here on the podcast. In our conversation with Patrick, we discovered that creativity is not just about art. It's a fundamental aspect of learning and problem solving. By restoring our inner creativity, we can unlock new possibilities in both our personal and professional lives. To our listeners, if you're eager to explore your creativity further or seek guidance in enhancing your innovative skills, I'd encourage you to connect with Patrick directly. Of course, his contact details can be found in the show notes below. For our listeners, Patrick is offering a special mentoring program and as well as workshops to help you reignite your creativity and problem-solving skills. And I'd encourage you, again, to take a peek in those show notes for all those details. Thank you for tuning in to the Audacious Living Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, follow, subscribe, or share if you haven't already done so. It's in those ways that this podcast continue to grow and we can inspire others to live their most audacious lives. Remember, dare to be audacious in everything you do. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stephenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.